Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for my fellow co-organizers for including me in the scientific program. Initially, I wasn't going to speak, but then Bill suggested it, and a couple other people rallied up, and then I accepted the invitation to speak. So thank you very much. For me, it would have been biggest honor to be part of the organizing, doing the logistics, in honor of my academic father, and I would have been happy with that, but it's even a greater pleasure to be giving this talk. So this is joint work with my PhD student, Brian Gonçalves, who couldn't be here, unfortunately, and my collaborator, Felice Manganiello, who's here, and is sitting there for all your hard coding theory questions. So if you ask me a coding question, I'm going to ask Felice to respond. So I'm thanking my sponsors here as well. So the title of the talk is LESS+ME. And every time I say less or me, you have to think about it if I'm using, less about me, more about this, or I'm talking about me or Machiavelli. So I'm going to play around with this just to make it fun. So before I talk about LESS+ME, I'd like to wish Doug a very happy birthday. And this is the picture, the most recent picture I could find online. And I wish I could have all these elaborate stories that we heard yesterday, very interesting stories about, oh, Doug and I go back to, 40 years ago, this was his picture 40 years ago. But the truth is, when Jeff and Doug were, making all of that beautiful math, or Charlie and Doug, my most important accomplishment was not wetting my pants. So I don't have these, I can make a joke at my own expense, right? So I don't have these elaborate stories. We go back to 2002, and this was Doug's picture on his website for the longest time, actually. But I know it's 2002 because if you look this picture up online, the name of the file is 2002 profile. So I know he looked like this when I first met him as well. And so 2002, so as Lucia mentioned, I finished my Bachelor of Mathematics honors at Carleton, and actually Daniel Panario supervised my capstone and NSERG undergraduate project, who's here, and I was doing combinatorics, and I wanted to go to Waterloo to do combinatorics, so I joined combinatorics and optimization. I did my master's with Bruce Richmond. Asymptotic analysis of combinatorial objects was the title of my thesis. And at the time, I heard all the cool students being in cryptography, and I didn't know much about cryptography. And not only all the cool kids, all the cool students were in cryptography, they were talking about this famous mathematician who had just left CNO, joined the computer science, and was teaching cryptography with a combinatorial lens. So, and I have to take this course. And that was my first interaction with Doug in 2002. I finished my master's, then I started my PhD with a supervisor in CNO, not with Doug. And I had a couple bumps, and then had it not been for Doug taking me under his wings, maybe I wouldn't have finished my PhD. So I've never said this on a podium, and we're being recorded. I owe my PhD to Doug. So thank you very much for that. And the rest of it is history, but I was going to tell you a little bit about theory and practice, but Ray did it really well. Not only the second edition that I studied cryptography from, I first learned cryptography from this book, but Ray had all 4 editions, so there goes that. And then I was also going to talk about my story of how I left academia, went to the industry. So I went from within cryptography, but from theory to practice. So I'm going to tell you that beat, but I'm not going to talk about the philosophical aspects of theory to practice because Ray did a great job, and I don't want to say anything else about that. So I defended my PhD in 2008, early 2009, and we have the recession, the hiring freeze, and I become an academic gypsy. And then finally I realized if I want to come back to Toronto, where my family has settled, my siblings, my extended family, I don't have the luxury of saying I want an academic position. So I leave cryptography, I go to industry as a cryptographer. So for 4.5 years, I was at a financial institution in Toronto. And I learned the hard way how going from theory to practice is not trivial at all. And I have lots of stories to share you. I was leading the SHA-1 to SHA-2 migration within the bank. So secure hash algorithm 1 to secure hash algorithm 256. And from a cryptographic perspective, it should have been a straightforward transition. We had the algorithms, we had the specs, everything was classical from, for a decade we had it, but leading it in the industry was one of my nightmares. So it was really difficult. So now what I'm bracing for is the quantum transition, because that is going to be an order of magnitude more difficult. And I spend a lot of time on preparing from the little contribution that I can have, preparing the financial industry or the other industries that I work with through that transition, right? There's a lot of things that we can do right now to prepare them for the transition. So a bit of my journey from theory to practice. I do not have pictures from 40 years ago or 20 years ago to share with you, but I have one picture that I really cherish. So this is a SAC 2000 Selected Areas in Cryptography 2019 that Doug was invited to present a keynote as his last lecture. And Ian Goldberg and Doug Stabilla thought I would be a good person to introduce him for his lecture. And I was like, really? This is such a big deal. Like, I was so nervous. I was so nervous. To make it even more interesting, the lecture happened in the very room that I defended my PhD. And I don't know which one I was more nervous for. So I was more, if not, equal, if not more nervous to present Doug in front of his family. And I did a bit of research. Doug was kind enough to share his CV with me at the time. So this is what I had. So I had a long speech, like 5 minutes, but this is what I wanted to share now. In a period of 37 years, Doug has had 80 invited lectures, supervised 11 postdocs, 17 PhD students, and 15 master's students. Maybe we have to update that, because since then, maybe you have graduated a PhD student. And 11 books, textbooks around the world. Some of them are translated to other languages, and on average, 10 papers a year. So I did the math, and 10 papers a year, because 37 years over, so you just do the math, 10 per, like that's almost 1 per month if you count the vacation time that you took. This is really amazing, right? And I said it then, and I say it again, to have been a small part of Doug's career has been my dream come true, but then finding myself in this, among you is also another dream come true. So let me, now that I have talked about Stinson and me, let me talk to you about LESS+ME. So the full title of the talk is LESS+ME, a post-quantum authenticated key exchange from syndrome, decoding, and code equivalences. So, well, some of you are from cryptography and may or may not know about these coding problems. And most of you know more than me about these coding problems. So in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page, I'm going to introduce these things one at a time, not get into too much technicalities because we don't have the time either. But I also want to talk about the post-quantum piece, like why is this important and why are we looking at this now, or generally these types of problems now, okay? So the LESS stands for linear equivalence signature schemes. It's an identification scheme that relies on hardness of the linear code equivalence problem. And ME is McAleese, which is a key encapsulation mechanism, which is based on the hardness of the syndrome decoding problem, okay? So as you can figure out, we're putting the two together to get an authenticated key exchange protocol. So at the end, that's the result I want to show you, but I'm going to take you to a detour and tell you why this matters before I do that, okay? Why this matters from a practical point of view. From a theoretical point of view, obviously these are interesting math and cryptography problems to study, but I also want to bring to you about like why practically this is what we need to do, these type of cryptography now. Okay, Ray and Maura talked about classifications of cryptography, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we have two classes, secret key cryptography and public key cryptography. Secret key schemes are very efficient, So the question I ask my undergraduate students, I don't have to ask here, but I'm just going to tell you the question, is that if secret key cryptography is so efficient, why do we bother with everything else? Because it has the key management problem. And the key management problem is not trivial at all. In practice, for a bank, if you want to use secret key cryptography to do any sort of confidentiality encryption, you have to send, let's say it's a 3 out of 5, you have to send 3 people in person to go to the data center where the key management center is, punching their password secret keys to get the fragment of the key from the device, then seal it, sign it, and then each of them go to their home where they want, the institution, the main office that they want to put the key fragments together again with different cabs, different cab companies, so the key fragments are not going to be intercepted, and this is by regulation. It's just, I never knew that it was this involved when I was studying the theory. Anyway, so secret key cryptography, great, efficient, but it doesn't do key management that well. So we have public key cryptography that is not efficient at all, but it helps us with management of key transmission. So key encapsulation mechanism is a type of a public key system protocol that allows you to exchange the keys, encapsulate a secret key that can then be used for confidentiality encryption. Okay, so that's how these are linked. So it's good to have a variety of primitives. You don't want to put your eggs on the same basket, but in practice, we only work with a handful of primitives that have been standardized. So standardized by institutions such as NIST, or the National Institute for Standards and Technology, or ETSI, their European counterpart, or there's a few of them that work together. They're usually aligned. So here in Canada, we use NIST for our specification of cryptographic algorithms in the industry. And standardization processes, they consider, before they standardize anything, like RSA or ECC or AES, they consider obviously security, but also efficiency and integration capabilities, like the size of the public key, the computational burden, as well as the security. And at some point, you need to make a compromise and move forward. But we only have a handful of primitives to work with. The industry doesn't care that us cryptographers want to explore. They need everything to stand the test of time or be standardized before they even hear about it. So we've had RSA, they've been happy with it. And even when ECC came, elliptic cryptography came and was standardized, no one in the industry, almost no one in the industry really jumped to it. ECC was a lot more efficient than RSA, but no, if it's not broken, why fix it type of mentality. And that is, rocking the boat is going to be riskier, and we're okay with the inefficiencies of RSA compared to ECC, okay? Now bring quantum, it's going to be a nightmare, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We also heard in Maur's talk and Ray's talk about computational security versus unconditional security. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but the problem with currently standardized public key schemes is that they're all computational security. So although we've had unconditionally secure public key systems, they have not been standardized. They did not bother because they said, as we heard from Mara today, it's too slow for what we want to do, right? We're okay assuming integer factorization problem is going to remain hard for the foreseeable future, and work with RSA instead of looking at an unconditionally secure and standardize that. And no bank is currently implementing an unconditionally secure public key system, for instance, okay? So we are dealing with the security of our everyday lives, from the cell phone to communication, SSL, HTTPS, credit card security, all of that. Computational security, assuming that integer factorization is going to remain hard for the foreseeable future. Okay, so far so good, but the problem is these algorithms, these problems, integer factorization, for instance, they have quantum algorithms that are going to solve them efficiently. So quantum algorithms as we heard also from Ray's talk, instead of bits, you have quantum bits. So instead of 0 and 1, you have a superposition of 0 and 1. So you store information differently and you process information differently. And hence, against a class of problems, not all problems out there, a class of problems, you get quadratic speed up. And that quadratic speed up is all you need to solve integer factorization problem efficiently. And if the attacker has access to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, because quantum computers exist already, all they can do is to factor 15 so far. They exist, so early models exist, but they can't scale it. So if a scalable quantum computer comes about and you're left with this, then all of our standardized public key crypto systems are going to break. Just a little parenthesis, secret key cryptography is not going to be catastrophically broken. For those of you who are not familiar with this development, standardized public key cryptography is going to catastrophically break, so we need new algorithms. But when it comes to secret symmetric key cryptography, secret key cryptography, doubling the size of the key when the parameters of the specification allows is good enough. So it doesn't give you that quadratic speed up. It's not catastrophic. You can still salvage the algorithm. Okay, so now come post-quantum. First of all, this term post-quantum in cryptography, everyone understands what that means, but it really confuses the industry and practical people. What is post-quantum? What do you mean? So a lot of vendors started this term called quantum safe cryptography, which is very misleading and is very vendor jargon, right? It's not safe. We don't know. It's resisting, right? So therefore, NIST said quantum resistant cryptography. Anyway, so quantum resistant cryptography, quantum safe cryptography, post-quantum is the same thing. Not only we have now a handful of families of hard problems that are at least thought to be resistant against quantum capabilities, we've had them for a very long time. Mach-Leese is like several decades old. No one cared to look at it in the industry. No one cared to standardize it because it was too slow. But now times have changed and we have everyone's attention to say, if you want to be safe against a quantum capable adversary now, or if you worry about the scenario, the attack scenario that we call harvest then decrypt. With a lot of the breaches, encrypted information is being harvested. The attackers are sitting on it. It's in the dark web. It's encrypted. You can't do anything with it now, presumably. But if a quantum computer comes about 20 years from now, and that information is still valuable, think about your social security number, social insurance number, financial information, health information that is still valuable to you, and therefore to the attacker 20 years from now. Then you need to worry about the quantum enabled attacks even now. So this is no longer considered to be a futuristic problem or a problem that mathematicians and cryptographers are interested in, and the practice industry people don't care. So we have their ears, now we need to take advantage of that, okay? So, sorry, before we go there, so classes of problems that are believed to be resisting quantum capabilities: hash-based, multivariate polynomials, coding-based, super singular isogenies, and lattice-based, okay? And then, so we've already had them, why not adopt them? Like, why didn't industry adopt them? So these are the classes of reasons why they didn't adopt ECC against RSA. Same reasons, like it's boring, it's the same reasons. First they said, if not broken, why fix it mentality. Quantum is a futuristic thing, we don't care. 2015, I represented my employer at the bank at the US conference for hardware security modules. Hardware security modules are devices that hardware protect, not software. Hardware protect the cryptographic key. So the keys are generated and remain within the compounds of that hardware for their life cycle, okay? So one of the market is basically monopolized by two vendors. It was one of the two, so I'm not going to mention who. But anyway, so I asked this decision maker, not just an executive, like the real technical executive, 2015, March, do you have a quantum readiness roadmap? And then he said, not before I retire. That same year, end of 2015, NIST came and said, we are going to have the competition. The deadline is 2016. Okay, so it changed really fast. But in 2015, one of the major manufacturers of hardware security modules giving us all the security in practice, implementing cryptography said, not before I retire. Anyway, so lack of interest, lack of a standardization, obviously, resistance to change due to cost. So the reason, for instance, that the US was one of the last countries, or the last country, that adopted chip and pin security for the credit cards was because their major retail companies, I'm not going to name, but just Google it, you'll find which one, didn't want to change the point of sale devices, the cost. They said, we know fraud is coming to the US because Europe and even Canada had adopted pin and chip for credit card. The card not present attacks are coming to the US, but we're happy to absorb the cost because changing the point of sale devices was more costly. Okay, so another classic reason is cost, and then the fear of unknown. So current crypto systems have stood the test of time, like our good old RSA, our friend ECC. A lot of these post-quantum, quantum-resistant schemes have not stood the test of time, right? So that's a problem. So NIST started the competition. I'm going to go very fast. This is the timeline. So the blue is lattice-based, red is coding-based, and then we have multivariate and isogenies. And you see that, right now we have 2 coding-based. I'm going to use one that is McAleese to make the primitive that I want, okay? So there are 2 less studied topics in post-quantum. These are the 2 problems that I study. One is, what about the other primitives that NIST is not standardizing? Because they're standardizing signature schemes and encryption schemes. So what about the others? And then the impact of any transition. Based on my industry experience, I have a lot to say about that. But okay, let's go. So confidentiality, integrity, we have 3 primitives. So one of them is key encapsulation. We already talked about it. The next one is identification scheme. Together, put these 2 together, you get the authenticated key exchange. NIST is not standardizing authenticated key exchanges because they're very context dependent. Okay, so I have for key encapsulation, I have McAleese, that it's one of the finalists, so good start. For identification, I use LESS. I'm going to show you very briefly, and then we put them together to get an authenticated key exchange. But we need to still prove that when you put them together, you still have the desirable security, attributes that you want. So you need to define what is the goal of the adversary in an authenticated key exchange. Luckily, Blair and Rogovec have done that, so we're just going to adopt that and put these 2 together and get our authenticated key exchange. So key encapsulation mechanism, this is a definition. You generate the key, you encapsulate, you decapsulate. You define what is your security notion. You define an experiment for the adversary to win its game, okay? You do the same for identification scheme. These are from the literature, nothing that I did. So just, you need to trust me that these are, these come from the literature, okay? Then impersonation security notion, then the experiment for this, okay? Now authentication, a key exchange. So Beller Rogovec defined the security notion, here it is, and some technicalities I don't have the time to go through, but then the experiment for the adversary to win this game for the key. And then we have random oracle model, but we want to prove that it's quantum secure. So quantum random oracle model, again, something technically that we want. Now, syndrome decoding, this is the problem. This is a statement. McAleese. Okay, so McAleese, again, is a key encapsulation mechanism from the literature. So we have it here. The other problem, linear code equivalence. Based on that, we have LESS, again, from the literature. And finally, LESS+ME. Okay, so this is the construction. Over here, we have the public parameters, long-term private key, long-term public key, from both Alice and Bob, our friends. Then Alice is going to start with the McAleese generating the key to send an ephemeral public key, so the session public key, to Bob. Bob is going to do the same, so ephemeral public key of Bob plus this encapsulation. Okay, so this is the McAleese part. Now, this piece is the LESS part, is the canonical identification part where you have, commitment, challenge, and then response, right? So this is the LESS structure that we have adopted together with 2 extra hash functions because we need to bound McAleese stuff with LESS stuff, right? And then at the end, the verifier Bob is going to accept or not, right? So this little piece here is the LESS part, the identification part. Over here is the key encapsulation part, okay? So we have theorems, we prove using provable security techniques from cryptography that we have the 2 notions that Beller-Rogover defined for security for LESS+ME. So Beller-Rogover match secure as well as Beller-Rogover key secure here. So we prove them, and then we have the bounds and everything. Very boring, very technical. But for parameters, we have the LESS parameters and McAleese parameters, again, from the standards, so recommended parameters. So just put them together. It's really big because these are McAleese, right? And that's what was always taken against McAleese, that it's not easy to do. But now we're swallowing the McAleese pill because of PostQuantum. So these things are, again, we're looking at them. So I have 2 open problems, and I'm going to end it there. So the first open problem is for the cryptographers in the room. So we have defined, this is our transcript, first of all. So this is our transcript. As you see, it's quite involved. Okay, and we prove the security against Beller-Rogover, but there are stronger security models for generic authenticated key exchange proposals out there, right? Some of them are even worse than us in terms of worse than this in terms of transcripts. Some are better. Can we compare? Can we do better? Can we basically prove the security of LESS+ME in any of these 2 and not have to compromise and make it an even worse transcript, right? Or are there efficiencies to be gained here? And the next question is for the coding theories in the room. So this I already said. This is the last slide. So as you notice, we had 2 hash functions. The reason we have 2 hash functions is that we need to make sure the session IDs are unique to those sessions. And the adversary, if you don't put them there, at least we haven't been able to find a way to stop the adversary from cheating. Okay, so we needed that. But is there a way to actually do better? Is there a way that we can simplify the transcript with that and not use 2 hash functions? So this is the coding problem, basically. Okay, so we make use of a pair of hash functions in order to give each pair of sessions a unique identifier. However, it may be possible to achieve this with only 1 hash function. So to do so, we've done a bit of preliminary work, but we need some help to the last stretch. To do so, one would need to prove that in distinct sessions that result in a systematic form of G tilde, which is our public parameter, does not collide except with low probability. And we have low probability of collision if the automorphism group of the code generated by G is small with respect to the group of monomial matrices. Okay, so basically, thus, to remove the second hash function, the order of the automorphism group of the code generated by the random matrix G must be small. So we've come this far, but still we can't really prove that this is going to work for the security, or even these things are, they exist in enough quantity for the security to work. And with that, I'd like to thank you all.